Mishpacha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother. Welcome back to my channel. I am here today to do my reading wrap-up and rankings for the month of February. Now, I read 12 books in the month of February, which I was pretty excited about, especially because February is a short month and I had stuff to do. So I felt like that was pretty good. Now, 3 of them were books for the BookTube prize, so those are obviously not going to be included in my rankings, but I did read them. And before I get into the actual ranking, I do want to say a few words about the books that I have not already covered on this channel before. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't do a Friday Reads this week, and that is because, number one, I was still in the process of finishing up several books, and number 2, I got some bad news on Friday, which is that Georgia was going to expand who could get the COVID vaccine as of March 8th to include educators, but oh wait, only K through 12 educators and not people who teach in higher ed, because we don't matter apparently. But not to worry, because I actually just scheduled today an appointment for myself to go get the COVID vaccine. I'm gonna have to drive to Alabama to get it, but it's worth it. But I just think it's so ridiculous that this state does not value my job or my life or my health. So yeah, Alabama, you're doing a way better job than Georgia. So yeah, go you. So anyway, I'm gonna go get my first dose of the vaccine on Wednesday this week. So I'm really happy about that. Because yeah, it was rough on Friday. So okay. So anyway, on to the books that I have not already covered on this channel. So the first one, I actually finished this on Friday, is Lucille Clifton's collection of poetry, Mercy. And I read this both for the 2021 Reading Women Challenge. I think there's a prompt to read a poetry collection by a Black woman, so boom. But I also chose this as part of my Lindsay readathon that I was doing this month to celebrate Lindsay of Lindsay's Book Life's birthday. And this fit the prompt of read a book that reminds you of Lindsay in some way, because Lucille Clifton is one of Lindsay's favorite poets. So this was a reread for me. I knew I was gonna like this, and I was not wrong. So I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. Lucille Clifton has what I would call a deceptively simple style, but you know, in this collection, she uses it to say significant things about the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell others. And there's a sequence in here about September 11th that I think is really powerful and that I would highly recommend. And if I remember when I post this, I will actually leave a link in the description box down below to where you can go read that sequence of poems online, because it's really good. But I'm going to actually read you a different poem in here. And this poem is about how Lucille Clifton was born with 12 fingers. And I guess it's a hereditary condition in her family, because I heard her say in interviews before that her mother and her grandmother, I think, were also born with 12 fingers. And this is not the only poem that she's written about this particular topic, but it is the only one that appears in this collection, and it's one of my favorites. So this poem is called Hands. The snips of finger fell from the sterile bowl into my mind, and after that, whatever I was taught, they would point toward a different learning, which I followed. I could no more ignore the totems of my tribe than I could close my eyes against the light flaring behind what has been called the world. Look, hold these regulated hands against the sky. See how they were born to more than bone. See how their shadow steadies what I remain, whole, alive, 12-fingered. So yeah, again, you can probably tell from that poem, it's, you know, the poems generally that she writes in here are not super long, and they don't use a lot of complicated language, and they're not super experimental. They're very straightforward, but they're also deep, and they're good and accessible. So yeah, 4.5 stars. The next book I finished was, I finished my buddy read of The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., which I was doing as a buddy read with Scott and Nell of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. So I did not like this book as much as I was hoping to. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I think the writing is quite beautiful, but for me, the plot didn't really get off the ground until sometime around the midway point of the book or later. And I also found the character development lacking, probably because there were just a ton of characters. And so when you have a ton of characters, it's difficult to keep track of who everyone is, and it's also hard, again, for me as a reader, to feel particularly attached to or invested in characters, or to be able to see their growth over time when you're working with so many balls in the air, basically. And that's something I've said on this channel before, that I really don't like. I really don't like it in fiction when there are like more than about 4 or 5 viewpoints represented in a narrative, or perspectives represented, because yeah, I am a very character driven reader, and so I feel like, again, it's difficult for me to become attached or invested in a character when you don't spend a lot of time with them and get to know them very well. So, but don't take my word for it, because I know some other people on BookTube have read this and really liked it. Greg of Supposedly Fun really liked it. Janae at Coffee and Copyrights really liked it. So, I'm sure it's worth a read. And I would probably say that if you don't get on with the writing style in the first 20 or 30 pages, that you probably won't get on with the book as a whole. Now, I actually like the writing style. It fell down for me in those other ways that I already mentioned. But I think this is definitely a book where whether or not you get on with the writing style is definitely going to influence your opinion of it as a whole. So anyway, I gave that 3 stars. I then finished Jessica Goudeau's After the Last Border, 2 Families and the Story of Refuge in America. This is for the BookTube Prize, so I can't say anything else about it here, but I have already recorded my thoughts elsewhere, and that will go up in a vlog once the quarterfinals round of the BookTube Prize is underway, but I did finish that. I then finished my buddy read with Lindsay of Lindsay's Book Life of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. This was also part of my Lindsay readathon that fulfilled the prompt to read a book by a woman, because Lindsay reads majority women writers. And we actually both gave each other this book as the same gift in our holiday book exchange that we did. And so anyway, so we're excited to buddy read it, and I did enjoy the buddy read. I always enjoy a buddy read with Lindsay. But I think we both found it kind of lacking overall, and probably part of that is because I feel like this is a book that, not unlike The Prophets, actually has had a lot of hype. And I think when a book has a lot of hype, it's difficult not to go into it with increased expectations, and then when it doesn't meet them, then you feel disappointed. And so I had high hopes for this because I really love Octavia Butler's Kindred. I think it is so smart. And this is also smart, but it's just very plot heavy, and there's not a ton of character development. And the plot gets repetitive after a while, especially in the second half of the book. It's very much, they walk around, they get attacked, then they fend off the attackers, and they pick up some more people, and it's just that same kind of thing over and over again. And that pretty much makes up the bulk of the last half to third of the book. And even though there is a character arc, there's definitely a clear character arc that I see in our main character and narrator, Lauren, from the start of the book to the end of the book. I definitely see some growth in her. But yeah, I felt like nobody else as a character, I didn't connect to any of the other characters. They were just kind of there to serve a role in Lauren's overall story. They didn't really have personalities of their own. I did appreciate the commentary on climate change and on religion, the formation of religion and the uses of religion. I found all of that interesting. I would have liked to have seen those themes developed more and talked about more. And possibly they're talked about more in Parable of the Talents. I don't know. But I would have liked to have seen more of that in here. Was there anything else I was going to say? I think that was about it. Just that, you know, again, I had kind of high expectations for this after reading Kindred. So kind of fell down for me in that respect. And again, this is why I shouldn't read books that are hyped. It's why I should just trust my gut instinct of not reading books that are super hyped. But, you know, I think it's fine if you like plot-driven books. It was very easy to read, and, you know, that's sort of a relative term because there are definitely a lot of rough, difficult, challenging things that happen and come up in this book. Like, it's definitely not a feel-good story at all. It's set in a dystopian future. So it's definitely it can be upsetting at points. But yeah, I just didn't love it like I wanted to love it. So it ended up getting 3.25 stars from me. I was entertained, and I did find it pretty easy to read, even if I felt by the end that Octavia Butler clearly has it out for dogs, because there are several dogs that get killed in this book. So yeah, about that. And then the last book that I finished this month, which I just finished today, was Through and Through Toledo Stories by Joseph Geha. And I'm not going to say much about this here because I'm planning to do a separate standalone review of this book because I read it as part of my 2021 Arab American Literature Project, where every month I read one book written by an Arab American writer. But this is basically short stories that are very, very loosely interconnected. They all revolve around an Arab American community in Toledo, Ohio. Some of the stories take place in the early 1930s, and it goes all the way up to, say, like the 1970s. And yeah, so like I said, they're very loosely interconnected. Sometimes you do see a name or a place crop up in a subsequent story that you read about before, but they're not interconnected in the sense that they're really recurring characters that you see, you know, do different things over time or anything like that. So I did like this overall, and, you know, as with any short story collection, there were some stories that I liked more than others, but I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. And again, I'm not going to really say anything else about it here, because I am planning to film a separate standalone review of this. So yeah, so that's everything that I finished that I haven't already talked about on this channel. So now on to the rankings. So again, I cannot include my BookTube Prize reading in my rankings for February, but just to recap, I did read 3 books for the BookTube Prize this month, which were Wilmington's Lie by David Zucchino, Inferno by Catherine Cho, and After the Last Border by Jessica Goudeau. So with that, I have 9 books that I read and a DNF. So I didn't count the DNF in terms of my, you know, overall number of books that I read for the month, but I am going to include it on the ranking because it was in fact the book that I liked the least, which is why I DNF'd it. So that was Muriel Sparks' The Mandelbaum Gate, which I just found boring, and I didn't like the characters, and yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. It was super boring, and I didn't like the characters, and I didn't care what happened to them, so that's why I DNF'd it. So that was the book I liked the least. And then in 9th place was Chinelo Okparanta's Under the Udala Trees. This is a book about a young girl in Nigeria who has to come to terms with her sexual attraction to other women, especially living in a country where that is not considered socially acceptable. And I know Chinelo Okparanta wrote this in part in response to the president of Nigeria signing a bill into law in 2014, 2015, something like that, I want to say, criminalizing same-sex relationships. So I think it's important in terms of that representation of an oppressed and marginalized group. But it did not work for me in terms of, it did not work for me with respect to its being a novel where you really learn about the main character and feel invested in her story and see her grow and change and stuff over time. So, so that one ended up getting 2.5 stars from me. In 8th place was The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr., which got 3 stars from me, and I already said stuff about that, so I'm not going to talk about it again right now. And then in 7th place was Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, which got 3.25 stars from me. Then in, what are we up to? 6th place was Through and Through Toledo Stories by Joseph Geha. Then in 5th place was Justin Phillip Reed's collection of poetry, the Malevolent volume. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it said really interesting things about the responsibilities of the African American poet, and Reed really challenges the idea that an African American poet should attempt to humanize black people to white people, and so he really leans into this idea of black people as creating fear amongst white people, and white fears of black monstrosity. So yeah, I thought he did a really good job capturing that mood that he was going for in the volume. So I got 4 stars. Then in 4th place was Philip Roth's Goodbye Columbus, which I quite liked overall, and has now taken the top spot as my favorite Philip Roth book that I've read so far. This is very heavily centered around men, so just FYI, but it's excellent explorations of Jewish American identity around the mid 20th century. So I think it's interesting to see how people come to terms with their identity in a variety of contexts, in the military, in a relationship, at school, etc., etc. So 4 stars. In the number 3 position, I don't have this one here with me, was Akwaeke Emezi's The Death of Vivek Oji. I also gave this book 4 stars. I found it pretty well written, and I also found it emotionally affecting. And I think it does a good job of creating tension and maintaining sort of an air of mystery throughout that keeps you reading. So yeah, this is the first Emezi book that I've read, so I'm excited to go back and read Freshwater, which is their debut, at some point in the future. So that got 4 stars for me. Number 2 book that I read this month was Lucille Clifton's Mercy, which I gave 4.5 stars to. And this should come as no surprise to anyone. My number 1 book of the month was Toni Morrison's The Bluest, which I also gave 4.5 stars to. And I said when I wrapped this up that this retains its spot as my personal favorite of all of Toni Morrison's books, even though, again, I can see on rereading it that structurally it's not quite as tight and not quite as focused as Beloved, but I found it very emotionally affecting, and yeah, this book emotionally destroyed me, and I love that about it. So that was my number 1 read of the month. Okay, so that's everything that I read this month. If you have thoughts about any of these books, I would love to hear that. Please feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this. I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. I hope you're doing good reading whatever you're reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call you mother?